So I will do some super basic introductions because then I'm going to ask that everybody kind of take a minute to tell you about themselves instead of me, telling you about the person who is sitting right here with us. So the first person with us today is Bernie Burnham. And I met Bernie on the school finance work group that was put together by the commissioner of Minnesota and ran through the pandemic. So I want to welcome Bernie. And then we have Sarah Louise Henry, who I stalked after seeing her speak at a board meeting down in Rochester. I was so impressed with just her demeanor and just thought she was fantastic. And I knew I had to have her on this panel. And then our the last two members to round out our panel are Brett Herbers, who is on the board, and you just heard Heather tell all about him, and I'm going to let him introduce himself in a minute also, and then Twee Ross, who's on the board, and I'm going to start with Twee to introduce herself, and then we will kind of work our way back that way, and then we'll get to some questions. So if you have any questions, you can direct message me or put them in the chat. And as I was saying, the chat will get saved, and so we can address some stuff a little bit later. And this is my first time running a virtual panel, so here goes nothing. All right, Twee.
Hi. So I wrote a whole thing, and I'm not going to go off of it because I'm really nervous and I don't like this thing. That's why Amy started with me. But my name is Twee Ross, and public speaking is not my thing. I have an 11-year-old son and a 10 and 4-year-old daughters. I'm secretary at our local unit and membership chair for Minnesota PTA. I work with kids, so these last few days has been the most adult interaction I have had. Yay! Do you want me to keep going or just introduce myself?
That's good right now. Well, thank you, Twee. And Brett, I'll let you go next.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Brett Herbers. I use pronouns like he, him, and his. I am communications chair on the board, moving into the new role as vice president alongside Amy. I'm unapologetically queer. That's going to be something you catch on to very quickly. And yeah, I just want to thank folks for being here and just to acknowledge that the struggles of the queer community go hand in hand with struggles other communities face, and specifically Black trans women. And so I just want to acknowledge the struggles that and the systemic oppression that exists in our world that intertwines many different marginalized communities. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brett. Sarah Louise, welcome.
Hi, I'm Sarah Louise Henry. I am the Equity Coordinator for Curriculum and Instruction for Rochester Public Schools. And I am very excited to be here. I'm also a parent of children going through the Rochester School District, and I also went through the Rochester School District. And so I'm just really looking forward to talking with you today. My background prior to what I'm doing now was actually in social work and working with marginalized communities and advocating with them and linking them to resources in our community, particularly through education. And so thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to talking with you.
Thanks. Bernie, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be here. And this is actually where I got my start in education as a PTA mom 30 years ago or so. And I know that my good friend Rosie Laffer-Kemp is on today. She and I worked together back in Duluth when our children were little. And I eventually became a teacher in the Duluth School District and served on the executive board of the Duluth Federation of Teachers, and now I'm the vice president of education in Minnesota. So obviously, public education, children, our communities are a passion of mine, and continue to fight for equitable education for all of our students in the state of Minnesota, no matter where they live, no matter what they look like, and no matter who they are. So I am thrilled to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't be happier than to have this group of people. I literally have goosebumps right now. So I sent a couple questions just to kind of get everybody thinking and on the same page about what we kind of wanted today. And, you know, we are a very parent-centric organization. And I'm pleased that we have parents and teachers on our panel today. So the first question I want to ask, and I'm going to start with Sarah Louise, is why is it important to have PTAs that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive? Now, this may seem like a, I don't want to say no brainer, but it may seem like a softball question, because I think a lot of our PTAs want to have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive PTA, but why is it so important?
Well, when students and families have buy-in to what's happening in the schools, then they are typically going to be more successful. So when you have students who, you know, where their parents are coming in and communicating with teachers and aware of what's going on in the school, then that promotes success throughout, not just for the student, but for the family as a whole. And so that connection and feeling valued in the school makes a huge difference. And when it comes to PTA, you know, the things that you're able to be aware of, so like funding of certain things that are happening, and just looking at programs and activities and events that are happening, to have that voice of families that are typically underrepresented and unheard, to have that voice makes a difference. You know, you have, we also have to realize that from those different communities come value and wisdom. You know, you may have someone who has struggled financially in the past and is really savvy with resources that may have an ability to contribute that. And, you know, it's just having that voice in those communities, to particularly with communities of color who have had traumatic school experiences within their different districts. Having somebody reach out and say, we want to bring you in. We want to hear your voice. We want you at the table because we value you and your child, really brings a different perspective to, you know, what they can contribute in the PTA.
Thanks, Sarah Louise. I'm going to go to Brett next and then to Bernie. So just so everybody kind of knows where they can wrap their head around stuff. So go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the grand scheme of how to be more inclusive in terms of PTA, I'm currently student teaching, and one of the big things we talk about is engaging with culturally relevant pedagogy. And culturally relevant pedagogy is connecting to students' lives, connecting to things that look like them, connecting to experiences that represent their identities. And I kind of see that as a way I can transition that into Minnesota PTA as well. Like Sarah Louise said, when you're looking at communities, excuse me here. One second. Sorry about that. When you're connecting with communities, like Sarah Louise said, if you don't have that buy-in, if you don't have accessibility to your programs, people aren't going to want to be engaged. And so oftentimes people do outreach and then you don't get that engagement that you're hoping for, and they say, oh, well, we tried and they weren't interested. But it's like, what was that buy-in? What was it accessible? Was your information in the language that these families speak? Do you have things that make people feel comfortable? For me, from like an LGBTQ lens, do you all use your pronouns? Do you share your pronouns in your bio? Do you make it normalized so that trans and non-binary folks are comfortable showing up in spaces where predominantly cis heterosexual parents exist in those spaces? So having representation in terms of that is super important, but also normalizing things and allowing your things to be culturally relevant, I think is very critical to engaging in a more diverse PTA.
All
Thanks,
right.
Brett. Yeah. Oh, Bernie, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I'd be ready. Everything that Sarah and Brett have said so far is absolutely true, and representation matters, obviously, whether it is in your PTA or it's in the teaching force, education force. Not only teachers, we have paraprofessionals that work with our students too. And we know that it's important for students and families to see people who look like them. It is a goal of ours and continued work that we do at Education Minnesota to try and grow our educators of color members and folks who are in the schools in Minnesota. Children are more successful when their families are involved. You all know this because you're PTA parents, and your kids are may or may not be happy that you're so involved. I think over the years, mine grew to love seeing me in school, and I'm sure that hoping you get an opportunity all to be in school as well. But the idea of having diversity and making sure that you're inclusive, that we are inclusive, I should say that. It's not just, PTA, but schools need to work on being inclusive as well. It's important that our students feel welcome and safe in their environment, and that our families feel welcome and safe. So it is about that, building relationships and asking not just once, like Brett said, and saying, well, we tried. You need to ask over and over and over again until you get someone to hopefully want to come. I've worked on a number of things over the years in my career. We have full service community schools in Duluth. I know you do in Rochester too, Sarah, and those are great places for families and students. That's an area where, what you do first is you reach out to the community and actually ask them what they want to see in their schools. And it's important that you get parent voice in that. Also working, just with young teachers and getting them to understand who their students are and who their families are. Parent-teacher conferences, one of my favorite things, sometimes hard, but it's the best time that you have to, introduce yourself, listen. Listening is important to people, to hear what they want and what they want to see for their child. We used to do hopes and dreams. I'm sure you've all heard of that. But I know in my classroom, that was that was the point of my first conference. It was never about me telling them what was happening. It was about families telling me what they wanted for their children. So making sure that they feel welcome, and invited into the conversation, into the school is always important. So hoping that we continue to get better at that.
Thanks, Bernie. And Twee, I know that you are a strong advocate of the be persistent. So do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so, be persistent. So kind of like everybody has said, just if you talk to someone and they say no, respect that, but don't give up. Just keep asking them, keep reminding them, keep letting them know when your meetings are. Talk to people while you're at the bus stop, while you're on field trips. And even though we can't do that now, you can still reach out and talk to the parents, ask teachers for help, send them in a little email and ask them to pass it out to the parents so that the parents in your kids' class can reach out to you. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. So you'd be persistent, be respectful, and be proud, right? Is that your little catchphrase?
Yeah. So be respectful. If people say they can't come, respect that, but don't forget about them. Don't stop asking them. Ask why they can't come. If it's because of work, try changing your meeting time and date. If it's because of childcare, try to offer childcare. If it's language barriers, try to provide translators or ask your school for help. Maybe they have translator headphones that parents can use, or they have other means of helping you with translating. Be proud of what you do. Promote all your positions, even if they are filled. Tell parents about them. Just because they're filled now doesn't mean they won't be filled next year. So just advertise everything. Invite people to Applebee's and get those personal connections, all your formal, informal stuff. So just make it personal. Connect with the parents, talk to them. Don't send out a mass email and think that it'll reach them. People want that one-on-one.
So I'm going to go back and say, does anybody want to comment on what we said or offer any insight into like that translation piece or that childcare piece or anything like that? Bernie?
Amy, yeah, if I could jump in, one of the other things, and Twee's right about this, you have to meet people where they're at. One of the programs I think that is great in a lot of our schools in Minnesota is the parent-teacher home visit program. And so that's essentially where you ask families if you can come into their home, and then you never go alone, you go with someone else. And really, again, it's about listening to families and what they want for their child. And the first training that I went through, and that was put on by the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. And one of the trainer was a parent actually from the community who said she had been asked and called probably about 5 times before she finally said, okay, fine, you can come. But people aren't always comfortable, again, meeting in their homes either. You know, you have to meet them where they're at. And so I think what Twee said is important. You know, do those one-on-one conversations in places where people want to be.
I agree. I really like how we focused on the barriers, because often, you know, when parents aren't engaging and whatnot, it's easy to say, well, they don't want to be involved or they're choosing not to be involved. When really we need to look at systemically what is missing that is blocking them. Is it, you know, some of those things that we talked about, or is it even an experience type thing where they've had a bad experience or they're not connected with their school system, or, you know, they feel isolated. So really looking at those barriers, I liked how she put that. And I think that that's something to always be mindful of, is what can we do to reach out and make people have that access.
Excellent. Brett, did you have anything to add to that?
I think my colleagues did a wonderful job at saying this. I have nothing else to add to this question here.
All right. So, oh, sorry, it went away. I had my questions here and then I changed screens. So the other one, the other question that I had that I said, I can guarantee you this is the #1 question that our PTAs have. And if I missed it, let me know. But we've talked a lot about removing barriers, and by we, I mean y'all, have talked a lot about removing barriers and meeting people where they're at. But if you're going to give one recommendation or #1 piece of advice for getting a more diverse membership in PTA. So we've taken away all the barriers. How are we going to get people to actually want to come? Brett, we'll start with you since you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm thinking about removing barriers, I think about showing up and specifically for people who have privileged identities, looking at how to get uncomfortable and to show up and speak up for communities who aren't represented in your PTA. Like I always look through things, like I said, through my teacher lens, and you know, when you can do small things and advocate for people through social justice, and that's going to make people feel more welcome. One example, we are all in Minnesota on stolen Indigenous land that, you know, does not belong to us. This was taken from Indigenous people years ago. And we sit here and, you know, something like a land acknowledgement can make your Indigenous students feel more comfortable and welcome knowing that they have an ally in you. Earlier this week, Daunte Wright was murdered. That is something that students are young and families like want to hear you acknowledge and stand up for Black families and brown families. if you're not acknowledging that, if you're quiet or if you sugarcoat it and you're not willing to address systemic, racism that exists within Minnesota, people aren't going to feel comfortable coming to join your organization because they don't feel comfortable there. For me, it's getting uncomfortable, especially as a white person. I acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege, that, me not saying anything means a lot, and it's not going to make people feel comfortable. I've had that in many situations with my queer identity, where things have happened or someone has said something to me that's been extremely homophobic and no one said anything, and that's not going to make me feel welcome in that space. So for me, it's being uncomfortable, showing up, and maybe telling a friend or a coworker or a colleague, calling them out, and making sure that the communities that you are supposedly wanting in your organization feel welcome and feel comfortable being in those spaces. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you, Brett. Sorry, that was just that was meaningful. I really want to just say that, thank you for that. And Brett really encourages us to be uncomfortable, but I think in the best way possible. And so I really appreciate you putting words to that. So thank you. Sarah Louise, do you have something to add?
Oh no, I was just like, preach, Brett, because that is so relevant. That's all those pieces, and how much silence sends a message to our families. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. So Bernie?
Yeah, I was going to follow up. Sarah, I saw your message in the box, and the part about being silenced and how that sends a message. It's absolutely true. We need to speak up and speak out and stand with our families and be there for them. And Brett, you're right, in the classroom, while those days are the hardest, I think, when we had the murder of our, young Black men happening all the time, those are, I think of the days in my classroom, and this was, a number of years ago, obviously, when 9/11 happened. So those are some of the best days where you let go of everything else that's on your, schedule for the day, and just let kids talk and listen to them and hear them out. They have questions and they want to talk about it. You can't just blow over it and gloss over it, because these are world events that impact them. And when you think about how our kids are in front of media every day, whether it's at home or on their computers now or devices that they know what's going on, and they have questions, and they need to be able to work through that with a trusted adult who will listen and give them the space to talk. So all the things that you've said are really important. And it is real. I mean, that's what we're all here for, first and foremost, is for our kids, right? So, yeah. And they're not easy conversations. And sometimes there's tears. But I think it's okay as adults for kids to see us cry as well, because that puts a more human aspect to it. And they realize that you're there for them and with them.
Or as my daughter says, you have to overcome the cultural stereotypes of people who cry and normalize it. So I have a question for you, and this is all about that being uncomfortable to learn more. So as part of this, Brett really encouraged us, and we did, and we totally agree with him that when we opened our session on Wednesday again, on Thursday night, when we opened our convention, Heather read a statement on behalf of Minnesota PTA about how, we are standing with our colleagues, and referenced, a lot of that in that acknowledgement. So should that have been read at the beginning of every session? Should that have been, reiterated, because we have people coming and going. And so at one point, I don't think it ever becomes insignificant, but at what point do people go, are they going to shut us out no matter what? Or are there people who are going to shut us out and say, oh, they're just saying that just to say it? Does that make sense? Like, oh, they say that all the time.
Yeah, actually, if I can jump in, we've just had this conversation recently, and one of the things on the national level that has been started by the National Education Association is no matter who we are or, where we're living, we talk about the indigenous peoples who are on the land that we're currently in, because, you know, we're meeting all over the country. And then to present like a small lesson about something that you know. So, you know, as we begin to talk about reparations and the things that have happened recently down in this area with the Dakota, you do the land acknowledgement and then tell a little bit of a lesson so that you really tie it to the land and tie it to people. Because that is a question, you know, is it just being done just to be done, and does it mean anything? It means a lot. So I think we continue to talk about it. I don't, you know, the question about doing it at the beginning of a convention and then does it have to be read in every session? I think that's an individual preference. Personally, I like to do it when I'm starting something, so.
Sarah Louise, did you have any?
Yeah, particularly with the land acknowledgement too, because I've faced that in our district where I run these equity teacher leader meetings, and we do it at the beginning of every session. And like Bernie said, we add on to it because, and these words are not mine, they come from our Native American liaison, but she said a land acknowledgement without action is just a land acknowledgement. And so we really try to also give a little information on how can you use this in your classroom, you know, just like a little reflection on it. How can you use this in your classroom? What do you think this may feel like being a student and hearing this in your classroom, and how important that would be? And also looking at not just acknowledging that, but also advocacy, moving into that deeper level on how can we support our, you know, indigenous communities in, you know, in different ways, and be mindful of what's going on. So it's a great way to, yes, acknowledge the land and everything that we are on, but also keep awareness and be mindful that the reason that we're doing it is also to prevent erasure of that culture and that history.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel that sometimes, and I say this about a lot of different things, is there are so many ways to get information out that it's like, how are we getting all this information out? So it feels like sometimes things are acknowledged in one aspect, but not in another. So like, you know, we acknowledged a lot of this at convention, and I mean, the fact that we have this panel shows that we're really trying to, you know, to broaden our horizons and our knowledge and share with our units what's happening. But, you know, we didn't put out a statement on Facebook, you know, and so it's like, how is it just one of those things where you just need to put it out everywhere?
I can answer that because that was part of kind of my answer for the other question we had.
Oh, okay.
Is, you know, we've talked about how, you know, it's not enough to just send out an email, but in some cases, you know, are we sending out emails that are just like, you know, to our parents, we want you to know that, you know, the PTA supports you during this time. We see you. We know that, you know, those parents are struggling with what happened recently with the death of Daunte Wright. You know, something as simple as that. Or, you know, in June, to our parents who are representative of the LGBTQ community, we just want to, you know, celebrate Pride Month. You know, just something little like that builds relationship and acknowledges and lets people know that the PTA is inclusive. You know, parents are sending out something or putting something out there that talks about, you know, different abilities and celebrating that, and letting people know that, you know, PTA welcomes parents who, you know, are differently abled, you know, just all type of things. I think if we're able to send out that email to try to get people to come, we're able to send out that email of support, or that post of support. And I don't think it's ever too much. I think we worry about what to say sometimes, and really there's not and we're talking about this in our district, it's not something where you have to be perfectly eloquent and write this big, beautiful speech. Sometimes it's as simple as, we see you, we support you, we value you. That's it. Or like Bernie said, sometimes just sitting with people in that space. You know, if you have a PTA meeting and you have business as usual without acknowledging some of those things that's happening in our world, what does that say? So really, I feel like it can never be too much. I think always err on the side of being supportive and uncomfortable rather than going on business as usual is helpful.
I also think another part of this is, and I'm sure all of our folks on the panel know this, you're going to get some pushback. You know, there are people that don't agree with us. However, that doesn't mean we stop, right? The work is important and we need to keep pushing forward, and we need to keep standing strong with our communities who need support. You know, we have membership all over the state. We have 86,000 members, and they don't all think like I do. I can tell you that. And I like to share this story. I guess I was naive when I became a new teacher at 40 years of age, because I started later in life doing that, raised my kids first. And I really thought as educators, everybody thought like I did. Oh, what a shock that was to me that they don't. So those are in my role now, or those are continued conversations that I have all over the state. And sometimes they're really hard. And I'm not going to turn people to my way of thinking necessarily, but I will continue to try. Never quitting is important to the cause and to the work that we do, as you know, with equity and anti-racism. So know that we all have each other to support one another, and the work goes on every day.
Twee, did you have something to add?
Yeah, going off of what Sarah Louise said, when you put out a statement, there's a difference between talking at people and supporting people. So just make sure when you make your statement that you're not talking at them. That's
Thanks, Twee. I had a question and then it zipped away. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think that part of the issue too in Minnesota especially is, and I noticed that Leslie Boggs, our national president for PTA, just joined us too. So feel free to chime in and correct me, Leslie, if you need to. Across the United States, especially, our PTA is very diverse. I mean, I would gather to say that like probably close to half of our state leaders are non-white. And, you know, so you go to National Convention or LegCon, and it does not look like our local units do, I would imagine, for the most part. I mean, I can't be in everybody's local unit, but if it looks anything like mine, it's a bunch of middle-aged white women. And I used to say, no, I'm not going to, sorry, train of thought. So I think that that's one of those things in Minnesota too, is we need to reframe how we look at PTA, because in Minnesota it is very white, but I feel that's also the culture of Minnesota. So I like that you say don't talk at people, talk with them, because oftentimes people didn't grow up with PTA. I mean, if I had a gallery view on, I'd ask all of us to raise our hands and say how many of us had parents who were in PTA. You know, there's a lot of us, I think, who had that. And so if that's not something you naturally grow up with, it's like Bernie said, you think everybody thinks like you, right? So you know, it's changing that way of thinking and really reaching out and building those relationships. And I hope I didn't say anything too crazy there, because I was kind of flying off the cuff. I want to open it up if somebody else has something to share. And like I've said before, if you have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat and I will relay them. But I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add. Leslie, I was talking about National PTA, so I don't know if you want to say anything or not, or you want to just hang out and listen.
I'm always willing to talk about National PTA. We do have a very strong diversity, equity, and inclusion program going at the moment with the board of directors, as well as throughout the state leadership that we have across the nation. The other thing that you will see if you come to a convention in June, which I hope all of you do, is that our strategic plan is now for 5 years. And within that plan, you see diversity and inclusion threaded throughout everything that we do as a PTA. And so it's become really much more aware of where we are and what the hurdles we have to go through. So I do appreciate the panel and all your thoughts about how to go forward this next year, because it's going to be even more important as we come back to school in person. So thank you.
Bernie, I like to say you grew up in PTA, and you mentioned that. Do you have any little bits of to add right now, as we're kind of wrapping everything up?
Sure. Well, like I said, yeah, I got my start, as a young mom, attending PTA meetings eventually, because I just always I'm a bit nosy and I like to know what's going on. I mean, so going to the PTA meetings, eventually ended up doing every position on the board, and was the president at Lowell Music Magnet Elementary all those years ago. But just, getting to know the school community that way too. As a parent, I was encouraged by the assistant principal to go back and get my degree. And like you heard me say, I finally started teaching at the age of 40. So had some, pretty strong, stances on the way the world should look for our children. And learned a lot from educators and other families too. So this is a great place to start. And I am thrilled that Brett is going into education. I love it when I get to see new teachers coming on board. It's a hard field these days. It's not easy. It's not easy being a parent either, by any means.
Okay, so we had a question, and I think that this might be, so the question is, how are Minnesota PTAs handling message around the latest murder in Brooklyn Center? And should we make a position statement? So National PTA, we tend to follow their lead on things. The last 2 weeks for gun violence has been insane. It's been, there's no way to comment to every single thing that happens. And we are so unfortunate in Minnesota that it has been, we've had such a I don't want to say target here, right? We've had so many horrible things happening. And so I mean, I'd have to look at Heather here and then to Leslie also, but to say that I don't think there's anything wrong with Minnesota PTA making a statement, because we follow the lead of National PTA, and they have a depressingly long list of position statements they've had to come out with because of all the violence and the systematic racism that's been happening. And so it is hard to keep up. And that is just so sad and depressing. And I mean, I don't know how to even acknowledge that, other than, we didn't have necessarily a position statement that came out, but I think to start by acknowledging it is probably the best way to go. And then I encourage you to look at National PTA's position statements on gun violence and systematic racism, and use verbiage from that, because that is a thing. And it is, yeah, I'm going to let Heather talk because, yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Heather.
Well, so this is where I've really struggled over the last 4 years as president, because so I refuse to do live media. That's just something that I'm not confident in. So I've never been on the radio. I've never been, I know other PTA leaders tackle that. And so for me, and I was really grateful to hear the perspectives on this. I've always been afraid to put out a statement and say the wrong thing. So I was always erring on the side of let's not say the wrong thing. So let's not say anything. And I'm learning that's not the right way to handle it. So as a leader of a state organization, I'm not handling it correctly. And so I want PTA leaders out there to know that it's a journey. You will find where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and to learn today, that saying something is better than saying nothing. And so I think that's where I've really struggled as a state leader is making the right statement. And now I need to lean more into making a statement. So that's where we're at. And looking at our two leaders that are going to be going forward, Amy and Brett, I have a feeling that they'll be much more responsive and quick, because it's such a forefront thing in their mind. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Heather. So we've had a couple other things come up in the chat. The breakdown of demographics of the families that attend our school. Oh, go ahead, Heather.
Nope, you go with your thing and I'll come back to it if we have time.
Okay. And so, yes, I see that Bernie mentioned that you can find that on Minnesota Department of Education, MDE's website, the breakdown of demographics. I want to see. Okay, and then Jackie asked if there's intentional plans at either national or state level. So I'm gonna answer that in this way. National and state level can make all the intentional plans that we want, and we can do things like this, and we can reach out and we can build those relationships, but we can't be in your local unit to build those relationships at that level. And I'm hoping that I'm on the right track, because I think I saw Leslie smile. So I don't know if that's the answer that she would give, but I'm going to let her go maybe. And would you like to speak to that, Leslie?
So explain the question again. I'm not quite sure I understand what she was asking.
So if there's any intentional plans at either the national or state level to market or promote to parents of color to join the PTA.
Yes, we actually have a marketing plan in place for our membership, and you can find it on pta.org /membership campaign. So you can find that on our membership portal. We are definitely promoting and doing things. We had some advertising go out earlier that was targeted at certain audiences, that being of individuals of color, but also needing everybody to understand that we need everybody at the table. And one good way to look at diversity and inclusion within your own schools is look at your student population, and are you representing your students? Does your board reflect who's at your school? So that's always something to be very much aware of. And is everybody at the table? And if they're not, then ask the question why. Not in a defensive or even an aggressive manner, but just wanting to know how we can bring them in to be a part of who we are, because we do need and value everyone at the table. So this is something certainly that we look at and encourage all local leaders to do. And that's one easy way to look at it, as well as looking at the demographics on your education site. I see Heather's got her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
First of all, I have to get myself off mute. I was actually going to go back a little bit, one step back. So sorry for changing the conversation a bit. The other thing that I want to encourage PTAs to do is lean on your district leadership for communication, because your school communities best. And so, working with your leaders in your district to help you connect with your schools, using your principals, using the teachers, using the folks that are in your district to help build those relationships is really key too. But we need to build the relationships and the leadership at the local level in order to get it at the state level, in order to get it at the national level. And this is something that we talk about with the Teachers of Color Act that we've been, highly supporting over the last couple of years. We need more teachers of color in our school system, but it's not an overnight fix. It takes several years to build that up. And so we have to start somewhere. And so I think that's the key too, is to get it started at the local, and then we'll find the changes as they continue going forward.
I had something, because while we're talking about relationship, first I wanted to touch on what Leslie had said about having that formal plan, I just wanted to plug in, having a formal plan in your district around diversity, equity, inclusion is great for when you do have that pushback, because you have that to kind of to lean on and say, this is what our values are. So that gives you a little, it can give you a little more confidence in, you know, taking that step out. So just be aware of your formal plan. And if you don't have one at your particular district, or if it's something that you are not sure of, then it might be something to look into. But the other thing was, everybody is talking about relationships, and that is like my number one thing for when you are trying to reach out and get more people of, but particularly in marginalized communities. Asking someone to be in PTA is one thing. Saying your voice is important and we need you and you're valuable is a whole nother thing. And so I love what Bernie had said about connecting at conferences. I think that's a great way to be intentional. You know, teachers have that relationship with their families. So making that connection or doing some sort of collaboration to say, you know, on that conference night, hey, you know, let me tell you about PTA. And not just that, but really, if you see a parent, if you see that parent who's out there at the bus stop, you know, directing things, or you see that parent that's out there and, you know, says hi to the other students and not just their students, saying, you know, I noticed this about you, and that is awesome. And I wonder if you would be interested in bringing your talents to PTA, being really specific in how you talk to people builds that connection. And once you have that representation, once you have people in those communities, that is a great way to get other people in those communities. Because if you are part of the Black community, you know other Black parents, you know who's in the schools, and you know to say, hey, you know, let's go, let's talk about this. If you are, you know, reaching out to the LGBTQ community, say, hey, PTA is proud to have you, you know, something to just pull people in that's intentional and not just saying like, you know, please come to PTA, we want to see you here. So just that relationship is so important. And I think that can be built by some of those things I just said, and also by how PTA presents themselves in the community as a message of support.
I think I'm going to add to that a little bit, Sarah. Another way to get people in, and I did this with educators in Duluth, is if you're running a campaign on anything, or you're helping, you know, for your community's referendum or school board races or anything like that, asking people to give you an hour and telling them you'll walk with them. I mean, door knocking, you know, everybody goes, oh, I don't like door knocking. But if you can just say to somebody, come on, walk with me for an hour. And they can, you know, they just can hang out with you and listen and watch what you do. And eventually folks step in. And it was a way that we really grew activism within our local then. And I think it works the same for parents. I, as a young parent, did not do any of that. But I think that had I been asked to give an hour of time, I probably would have done it. You know, we can push kids in strollers, and we can take kids along for the walk too. I mean, that doesn't hurt anything. They're part of who we are, right?
A quick story off of what Bernie said. So I've known Heather for a few years now, and it took her almost 6 years to get me to join and to door knock and to do all the things that you just said. But she was persistent and she kept asking, and she got me to do this panel. And so it takes time, but that relationship is everything, because then I trusted in her that I wouldn't be put in a position that I'm uncomfortable in doing, that if I had any questions, she was there for me, so I wasn't doing this alone. So just building that relationship, and then PTA follows, like it just really follows. So.
Thanks, Twee. So I'm going to try and wrap us up within 5 minutes so we can have a 5-minute break, because this has just been fantastic. And I'm going to end kind of hopefully on a lighter note, but at the same time, a very important note. So one of the things I tell people when they're, when I'm training in PTA leaders at the local unit is I say, you want to make friends with the office staff and the custodians, because they're the ones who are going to get you what you need when you need it and get you in. So who can PTAs reach out to in the districts to find families that aren't necessarily connected to PTA, but that they think might be good additions? So that's my little thing that we're going to end on, I think. So if anybody has any.
At our school, our cultural liaison is key. She reaches out to all the parents. She helps us with communicating with them because we have a huge Hispanic population, and she makes them feel comfortable at our meetings. She is our go-to.
Our district has equity specialists, so they're in every school and they have that connection with those families. They do some of those home visits. It would be a phenomenal plan to have them reach out because they have that connection and that relationship already. And there's that trust in them asking, someone to come on board. Also, if you have in equity, like I'm the equity coordinator for curriculum. So asking someone like me, how to do that. We have a Native American liaison. We have a Hispanic Latinx liaison. So we have some of those things built in, and I don't know if you guys have all of that in the different districts, but if you have positions like that, those are other ways you can do that. And also in your community, if you have people who are connected through, different abilities and, LGBTQ, if you have people in your community who you see are doing that, they may know parents who are in some of those schools. So that may be another thing too. But are you having people who are representative of those cultures and marginalized communities and underrepresented communities? Are you having them at the planning table and the planning stage? Are they part of developing your diversity statement? So that's kind of a helpful way.
Yep, and if you have full service community schools by any chance, they have coordinators or facilitators that do the work of reaching out to community and also to families. That's a good piece. At some point here, we will have in-person concerts and things happening back in our schools. So, to have a table there and just be there to welcome folks and, let them know who you are and try to have those conversations. I think that's another good way. I can't wait for us to be all back face to face. I am like someone said earlier, I am very much extroverted and like to get out on the road and meet with everybody. So this has been interesting for me, but surviving obviously like all of us.
Thanks, Bernie. And Brett, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Yeah, thanks for having us, folks. And I just want to remind you that diversity belongs at every level of your PTAs. I think oftentimes people will fill maybe a token spot for someone to serve as diversity and inclusion coordinator, and then they'll stop their work there. Diversity belongs in the role of the president. Diversity belongs in the role of the treasurer. Diversity belongs in every single role. You should not stop just because you have one diverse member of your board. Oftentimes people are fine with an all-white board, so why should you stop when you're adding more and more diversity? So make sure that you don't tokenize people when you're bringing them on the board. Make sure you're having those authentic conversations. And yeah, thank you all for showing up and having these uncomfortable and challenging and brave conversations about moving forward to help support our communities.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to do one thing. I'd like to have everybody unmute themselves quickly, and let's give our panelists a echoey round of applause. Thank you